Discover the Our MedTech Lives podcast, where industry experts share their career stories, key achievements, and insights into overcoming challenges in the MedTech field. Hosted by Zilka Rima and Kash Ikram. Hi everyone, and welcome to the third series of Our MedTech Lives. Today, we couldn't have anyone bigger and more important in the MedTech industry, Joe Mullings. Joe Mullings is a seasoned entrepreneur and influencer, an influential figure in the MedTech, healthcare, life science sector. He founded and is the chairman and CEO of the Mullings Group, which specializes in executive search, MedTech, health tech, life sciences, recruitment, and they've done over 9,000 successful searches. I looked it up. He also launched Dragonfly, which is a media production company producing award-winning docuseries, and he's also founded TMG Pulse, which is a MedTech news and opinion platform. So please Google those, look them up. There's a lot on LinkedIn and YouTube, loads of useful information. And on top of that, with the little time he has left, he's a strategic advisor and board member to a lot of startup firms. So in the past 3 decades, he has cultivated a formidable presence in the executive search, talent strategy, media-driven leadership for MedTech. It's a great honor for us to welcome Joe Mullings.
Thank you, Kash. Really appreciate it. And Silke, it's good to see you as well. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with your followers.
Thank you.
Welcome, Joe. And for the very few who do not know you in our industry, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and why you chose MedTech as your sector?
Sure. So I grew up in New York and went to university at the University of Dayton, Ohio, and got a engineering degree in 1984. So that dates me a little bit. I spent a couple of years as an engineer, predominantly in the electro-optics space, and fell in love with that, but realized I couldn't work in a large corporation. So I quickly left that and exercised my entrepreneurial spirit and opened up some businesses and did relatively well, sold those off. And then I was in between professions, and I walked into a friend of the family who was a headhunter and said, "Hey, I need to work. My brain has turned to mush."
Yes.
And after about a 2-hour interview, he asked me if I wanted to become a headhunter. I said, I can't sit behind a desk. It'll kill me. I said, but by the way, what did your top salesperson make last year? He told me. I said, I'll start next week. So that was December 4th, 1989. I worked for Sebastian Lavolsi and Bill Joes, who I'll forever be thankful for. They got me started. And I opened up my own firm down in Miami in January of 1992. We determined it was going to be MedTech very early. And we thought it through because people are getting older. It had a built-in governor, meaning the FDA, and you always want a business that has some sort of throttle control on it, because if something grows out of control, it crashes just as quickly. So that MedTech grows at 7 to 8%, but we determined we were going to go after the micro markets in it that grow 20 to 30%. Yeah. Today, we would call those micro markets structural heart, surgical robotics, certain categories, digital health. But along the last 35 years, there's been a series of those. We built the first stent companies, drug-coated stent companies, and they're on through. So we did that. We've got offices here in the US, Canada, UK, APAC region, and we continue to expand out. So I just love the MedTech industry. You're born an engineer, you don't become one. So that's kept my interest. And it's a very difficult industry to become a subject matter expert in due to functions, roles, levels, therapies, disease states, technology, et cetera. So we knew that would be a barrier to entry, and we'd become experts because we have like a TMG university to learn that all at. Right. So we determined to be experts in that. And so I always like to pick something that's super hard because not many people will put in that work.
Yeah. And you built a team of pretty like-minded people. I'm thinking Tom in Europe, Ajay in Asia Pac. Who am I missing? You can fill
Holly Scott, who's been with me for 28 years, Matt Kaufman for 22 years, Brian Blasco. These are people who would know Mike Moore for 20 years in the industry. Rick Jeffrion sits as a vice chairman, and he's been involved as a CEO and a venture capitalist. And we just recently launched, which is independent of TMG, but associated, a MedTech consulting firm with myself, Glenn Snyder, who used to be the head of Deloitte's MedTech practice. He just retired.
Right.
Jeffrion and Bernie Haffey, who is a serial C-suite and also venture capitalist and runs investments out of a family office. So That'll be
Wow.
officially announced next week, but that's just a peek preview of it. And that will
Wow.
be predominantly focused at emerging tech startups. And there's not a standalone consulting firm that gets them up out of the ground and on the rails, both OUS to the US as well as US-based companies. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, you're pretty unique, and you've put together a Liverpool FC of Premier League in terms of top talent at your organization. Fantastic. So one of the things that you've developed, which is pretty unique, is you are a recruitment company, but you're also putting out this free information, this sharing, which is amazing. And Dragonfly is a big part of that. And there's this quote about Dragonfly from you, right? Where you describe Dragonfly as being crazy until it wasn't, right? So maybe you can elaborate on what that journey was that made you say that.
Yeah, it was crazy until it wasn't. And now I see, and I'm happy about it, I see other companies
Yes.
as well as search firms using media as a component to their success. So it really got kicked off in 2015 when we were selected to work with Johnson & Johnson and Google to build Verb Surgical, which was a very aggressive build of a soft tissue surgical robot. You'll know it as Otava when it comes out today. So Scott Hunnekens who's a real visionary. We sat down and we had to get about 250 engineers hired in the Bay Area. We actually sat in the very first building, the first server for Google was in. That's where Verb was located. And I told Scotty, I said, listen, the classic old way of one phone call, one conversation, one point of influence, if you do the math backwards, there's no way for us to hire 250 people in the Bay Area. I said, why don't we do what Facebook's doing? Why don't we put out content online? And he said, where? I said, well, I'll call LinkedIn and we'll see if LinkedIn plans on doing video. And at that point, they were just starting a beta. So we were the very first firm using, as a headhunting firm for sure, but one of the first firms in having video on LinkedIn, where Google wouldn't let us interview inside the Google building. So we took the executives outside in the parking lot and interviewed them in the parking lot. It's still online. If you put in Google, if you put in Verb, Joe Mullings, you'll see the original videos out in the parking lot. But after a while, they let us in the building. So that was the start of it. And we realized that telling stories about people, about who will you become if you go to work at a company, and the people, the technology, the culture, and the mission. If you start to tell stories about that, we love stories. Prehistoric times, we've sat around campfires telling stories. That's how messaging is passed on. So we thought, if there's nothing more important than family, it's your career. Why would we not tell stories about how to develop a career and where you could do it?
Yeah, and you basically took that campfire process and digitized it, right? You brought it into the digital world with, and those stories, I can feel the authenticity from people, great daily content, discussions about what's happening fresh and new, educational, really engaging content that you guys have pioneered in our space, right?
Yeah. On that, one of the things that we also do is we want to remain provocative and respectful at the same time, Cash. So it's really important. One of the compliments we get very often is it's not pandering, and it's not sort of too curated. It's certainly high quality and thought-provoking, which is really what I think everybody should do, because if you're not thought-provoking, you're really not pushing the envelope as to who you could possibly be.
Right. So what advice would you have to other senior leaders in MedTech companies who are thinking of how do they increase their media presence? What should they be communicating? How should they be communicating?
Yeah. Well, one of the challenges in the large organizations that I've seen for the decade plus that we've been doing this aggressively on LinkedIn is, unfortunately, the large strategics censor and punish people who have an opinion online. Even though LinkedIn is paid by them personally, it's their own personal brand, it's their own personal platform. But the number of people who have become censored because they're offering their unapproved opinion online about things. So it's become a very difficult place for an individual to share their thoughts, and actually in some cases puts their careers at risk. I've seen it. So that's one end of the spectrum. But the other end of the spectrum is the audience wants honesty and transparency, and as much as you can do with $1 billion company. Look, I understand there's definitely barriers and boundaries that should be sort of appreciated and respected. However, people also know when they're getting something that's way too curated and something that is not quite telling you enough data to be closer to the truth than not, right? The pure
Yeah.
truth doesn't exist. And in fact, there are some anti-truths out there online.
Yes.
But sometimes the curation does not allow for somebody to make a career decision, pursue or not pursue a job or an opportunity.
Yes.
And therefore they get cheated out of becoming who they may become.
Yeah. And that's something that we both faced. I mean, Silke, you even had a potential employer tell you that they would employ you, but you'd have to stop doing this podcast, right? And that was, we were thinking, why don't you use us to, put content out there for you rather than, taking poor Silke off the internet. That's not.
And also, what I see is on LinkedIn, when people post, they post in waves, right? When they look for a new job or when they have a career change, and then it's super quiet again. Would you recommend to have a real consistency and strategy for everyone at every level, or what would be your recommendation?
Yeah, you should always be networking, not when you need it.
Yeah.
So, it's how do we keep our circle of friends through the decades? We stay in touch with them. How do we expose ourselves to new relationships? We put ourselves in circles that we think we may want to have an alliance or a deep relationship with, whether it's a sporting, whether it's a church, whatever it is. You'll put yourself in that circle. For some reason, people don't put that practice as they curate their careers. And I will tell you that the best opportunities are coming when you're not looking. When you are looking, especially if you're being forced into looking and you were riffed, or you're going to be riffed or downsized, you're usually desperate and have a bias towards making sure you're not unemployed. And that oftentimes doesn't lead to making good decisions. So I firmly believe that people should set aside the same way they set aside 45 minutes a day for exercise, whether it's walking, riding a bike, lifting weights. Maybe not that frequent, but I would give that prescription to my children is 45 minutes a day should be spent networking and creating more future opportunities for yourself. Be standing in plain sight, get job offers or at least get interview offers. And that is the number one way to accelerate your career and have you have choices all the time. But it's just for whatever reason, we're not taught that certainly in grade school, secondary school, and certainly university today, for the most part, doesn't teach you anything.
I mean, to this point, to always do it on your website, I found this super nice sentence. We inspire you to look well beyond what the obvious is in your career, 2, 5, and 7 years out and in the future. Can you tell us what you mean by that and how you know?
Yeah, look, as we sit here today, all three of us and each of your listeners, there's a current version of ourselves, there's a past version of ourselves, there's a near-term version, and there's a long-term version of ourselves. And we've got to be serving each of them. Certainly the past version should have us reflect on things, but never regret. But there's a current, near-term, and far-term future of ourselves version. And you've got to be thinking about all the decisions you make and all the decisions that you don't make and how you're serving each version. Now, certainly we're compelled to serve the current version ourselves more than not. I mean, that's a survival mechanism. But if you're really going to be strategic, you should be thinking about the 2-year self, the 5-year self, and the 7-year self. That's about all of us can reach out to because things are changing so fast. But your decisions should be involved in each of those evaluations, whether it's a relationship, a career choice, purchase, a large purchase, whatever it is. How is this serving each of these? At least ask the question. And amazingly, in your brain in the middle of the night, you'll get answers. But if you don't ask the question, how this is serving my present self, near term, and far self, I think you're cheating yourself.
Yeah, 100%. And you always frame experiences not as failures and successes, optimal or less optimal, right? That these are great terms that I've learned from you. Maybe explain what you mean by that and what your philosophy is.
Yeah, look, life is a series of outcomes.
Yes.
My next tattoo is going to be reflect on everything and regret nothing. So I've been thinking about that one for a couple of years. I just have to figure out where it's going to go. But life is a series of outcomes. If you view something as a failure, you become less resourceful.
Yes.
Right? So you can immediately take the ding and say, well, I didn't expect that to happen, which is fine. That's totally acceptable.
Right.
And now what shall I do?
Yeah.
right? Should be the immediate question after that. So I do, and thanks for catching that, Cash. It's life's a series of outcomes: optimal, less than optimal, and super optimal.
Yeah.
And to view anything else becomes a hindrance in your performance. And that's if you ever think about or read about great athletes,
Yes.
the best athletes in the world, whether you want to look at Michael or Kobe or any of them. And if the crowd here is footballers, whether it's Ronaldo or I might be a little different with that one, but anyway, I don't think they ever see anything as a failure. I think in the moment, it was an outcome and a less than optimal outcome, because then their performance will always be hindered.
Exactly. So focus on learning rather than, perfection is the enemy of good. I always tell my people, right? Let's get to good. We will get to perfection at some point, but let's focus on good.
Or
Right?
cycle through. I learned this recently from a good friend, is good enough as long as you're cycling through the exercise very rapidly.
Yes.
Right. So a lot of people will look for perfection, Cash, as you said. Doing that, though, allows the opportunity for adjustment to go by the wayside. So, there's a speed of decision making, and certainly, life or death situation, surgeons, good enough is good enough, but they cycle through that 30, 40 times in a minute, that in the pursuit of perfection, which is okay, but cycle through your decisions. Don't get locked in on perfection. Really focus on the cycling of decisions. Good enough, move again. Good enough, move again. Good enough, move again.
Exactly. I've been in a situation where my team comes and says, we could do A, but here are things that could go wrong. And we could do B, and here are the things that could go wrong. And they're kind of stuck. And I'm like, well, pick one. Let's pick one intelligently and do that. And they say, well, what if it goes wrong? Right? Well, then we do the other one.
Right.
So we fail fast. We learn, we move forward.
Well, we learn and we cycle. It's that Pareto decision of 80-20. Make the move, read the field. Make the move, read the field. That's what's beautiful about the game of football, soccer. I played D1, and it's a much more active chessboard.
Yes.
And what's happening off the ball oftentimes is more important, always more important than what's happening on the ball. And life is like that as well, is if you get obsessed around the ball itself, you're missing the opportunities in the game. It's what's happening off the ball that's way more important than what's on the ball.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to give Silke a chance, right? So staying on this talent sporting theme, right? So when you're hiring the right people to go into the team, right? You talk about Price's law, about hiring force multipliers and about lightning rod hires. So maybe you can explain these. Maybe these are a bit American terms, but to our international audience, what you mean by those and what you're strategically doing when you hire these people into a team.
Yeah. So one of the most important things are the first people you hire into each function in an organization. We call those lightning rod hires. Whenever I've built a company, and again, most of my are emerging tech startup companies, I give guidance to either the venture team or the CEOs and I said, you need to get the absolute best person available in that function, whether it's a reg function, a clin function, a sales function, whatever it is. Because the first question that comes out of the A player's mouth when they're considering going to the company is, who's the CEO and who's the leader of that function? Without exception. If that question doesn't get asked, you're not dealing with an A player. There are some people that said, sure, I'll be interested. And if they don't quickly ask that question, so that lightning rod hire is always worth the spend and the disruption on what you budgeted, because they'll usually outstrip that unless you're really educated and you've built a company successfully before. So that's the lightning rod hire. And here's the second reason why. In any creative endeavor, a normal distribution curve, the square root of the number of people in the company do 50% of the work. This is Price's law. So if there's 9 people in a company, 3 people in the company are doing 50% of the work and the other 6 are doing the other 50% in a creative environment in a normal distribution. But if you take that to 100, you've got 10 people doing 50% of the work, 90 doing the other 50% of the work in a normal distribution, normal hiring distribution in a creative endeavor. So if you don't set up a hiring process that by design exclusively pursues Price's Law people, you will end up with that distribution in your talent pool. So you can adjust that. But if you are just classically hiring and paying attention in a normal way, that's the distribution curve and the number of people that come into the company. And there are organizations that are clients of mine, not enough of them probably, that exclusively hire Price's Law people without exception. They would rather leave roles open. They would rather either lower the requirements in order to get the best person at that functional level, or greatly enhance the compensation of the role in order to get the best person hired. And
Yeah.
I have never saw an organization fail that overhired as a practice.
Yes, exactly. And then, you don't hire short term, think long term, right? And also, you need a professional company to objectively look at this. Otherwise, you end up hiring people people you trust, maybe, but maybe not optimal for this current project, right?
Correct. And the guidance I give to all my client partners is never like or dislike a person the first 5 minutes of meeting them, because you then are justifying that initial decision the entire way.
Yes.
And it's hard to come off of you either liked them when they walked in by what they wore, the game they played, by doing interview 101, saying, oh, I see you played football at, NC State. Oh, my son
Yes.
played there. Suddenly there's a like there. And now you're justifying why you're liking them the rest of the way. And the inverse of that is somebody comes in and you just don't like the way they move, or you don't like the way they smell, or whatever it is. And then you spend the time continuing to give justification to why you dislike them.
Right.
So the first 5 minutes, like or dislike, be disciplined enough to stay off of that. And I do that without exception. And I am glad I do, because there's been people that I would have hired that I definitely shouldn't have, and vice versa.
I think, Joe, you are super strategic and you always have a plan for 2, 5, 7 years. What is your answer to the people who are saying today, but everything has changed, the funding is not possible anymore, I cannot afford hiring these 8 people because VCs or investors only go once it's commercial, not investing in early stage anymore? What would be the answer to these people?
It's a great question. I would say that the funding is happening. So we're seeing funding happen, right? And especially in the most difficult B rounds right now, I would say, today in August of 2025, coming into September, the B round is the biggest challenge right now. And some of that has to do with uneducated VCs in the market. Some of that has to do with terrible investments on the back end of people over investing in the digital domain in MedTech, not really thinking through how they were going to get paid. But, there was a lemming mentality to that. So they got dinged on that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that was people got into categories that they probably today wish they weren't in. And I would point to surgical robotics for that, right? Cash and I just came from SRS, and I think there were at least 30 large format soft tissue robots on the floor. And maybe there's 4 companies that can acquire one of them.
Yeah.
So, but when you get in that deep, you've got investors, you've got LPs, you've got to find your way out. So I would say the money is there. I'm seeing the investment dollars come in since March of 2025 with the tariff game and some of the behaviors coming out of, DC. And I hate to say it, but the US drives the world economy in MedTech.
Yeah.
And so with that, when we sneeze, the rest of the world gets the flu. And usually, especially Europe, generally has a much longer runway of returning back to any semblance. And even if you take EU MDR, and that in itself has been, a challenge. So I would say looking for where technology is going to be in the next 2 to 3 years is where you should make your career decisions, but be very careful, because while AI is interesting, it's a very broad term.
Yes.
While robotics are really interesting as well, you can get experience in robotics that transcends any of the categories. So I think soft tissue is already crowded, endoluminal, endovascular. I do like some of the aesthetic space on dental, as well as cardiac imaging. There's an organization that I'm doing some consulting for right now. I can't say who they are. So those categories I like. So depending on if you're a clinical person, an engineer, regulatory person, sales, marketing, be very, very careful on where is the market going on your next career decision. Don't look too far backwards.
Yeah, we were going to ask you about that. What's hot? Where should people be looking to be in the next 5 years? So because it goes in waves. I remember when I started, orthopedics was hot. And then when Silke and I met, anything cardiac was amazing. Valve repair, valve replacement, and then TAVI just exploded. right? Now the talk is all AI, right? And robotics and digital. But that's not just in soft tissue, right? There are so many other areas where AI is coming in, and software. We did a podcast on software as a medical device, right? That's another area. Not all these companies will survive. Not all this technology will find a route to revenue, right? So it's very important that you analyze the market and see what's good and what's, going to struggle.
I mean, there's a couple of places to look immediately. One of the first
Yeah.
things you look at is reimbursement, obviously, and we're
Mhm.
hypersensitized to that, especially in the US market. So the first thing you need to look at is what's the pathway to reimbursement?
Yes.
And then if by design it's not a category that survives on reimbursement, generally aesthetics, some of the ophthalmology market, those don't have a reimbursement pathway yet. They still have an FDA pathway. So you have to look at those and so if I was ophthalmology and robotics,
Yes.
I might go into ophthalmology robotics instead of soft tissue.
Mhm.
But if I was an engineer, my engineering experience, whether it's ophthalmology, robotics, soft tissue robotics, endoluminal, is currency I can spend anywhere in the future on robotics. So those types of things are of interest. And the same thing with market development in robotics is if you're able to take a brand new platform to market and find a way, clinical acceptance, adoption, ongoing utilization, that tends to transcend. And I'll tell you that because we've built so many robotics go-to-market teams. That's an invaluable experience. Akash, it's okay. Cardiac is making a big comeback right now. So the cardiac market looks very, very good. And there's been a resurgence in the valve space, believe it or not, because it was very crowded for a while.
Yes.
So you're seeing investment dollars go there. The endovascular robotics space is also ramping up quite a bit. And the reason for that is it's a much less expensive robot to build. And there's many more companies that potentially can acquire those. So that's interesting. Although I think the telestroke market is being overplayed. I think there are going to be too many legal issues and logistics issues on that. But I still think the endovascular market's good. The endoluminal market, I think, may be the most robust of robotics over the next 5 to 7 years.
And
in that
you
space.
mentioned dental earlier.
Dental as well. So I like dental on the aesthetics. That may have a pathway if you go back to the early LASIK and ophthalmology days, right? So dental will be non-reimbursable. It's an aesthetic, it's a cosmetic, and refractive surgery on the LASIK side enjoyed a fantastic path there on the acquisition. So that dental space is picking up. And you might see orthopedics really it's moved away from being exclusively plastic and metal. I'm a big fan. I'm very clear about this of Ivan Tornos and Zimmer Biomet. I think what Ivan's doing is revolutionary and bold, to use his word, but he's incorporating AI with Canary Medical, with Bill Hunter's technology. He's really working on the digital end on both ends. He's commercializing it, making it cool with Schwarzenegger. I think some of the people in MedTech are frowning on that and thinking it's becoming a little too much. I think just the opposite. I think Ivan is turning people into customers instead of patients.
Exactly. It's innovative and it's bold. And it's pretty amazing. Now, on the flip side, there are going to be companies and maybe parts of our industry that may not be around anymore, right? So I'm thinking, are fat loss drugs going to kill whole sections of the bariatric market?
Thank you for reminding me, okay?
Yes.
Yeah, look, the GLP-1s are I've been fortunate to sit with some really bright people in that category. And I think the GLP-1s are interesting to watch that pathway. There are some that are thinking it could be a feeder system for bariatric, although deferred, right? Because, and with the endoluminal space and the soft tissue getting better and better, and ASCs becoming ambulatory surgical centers. So in the US, for those in Europe who might not know that, these are these clinical areas, specialty of care, still getting reimbursement now, dropping into it from CMS, which determines reimbursement, and they're always almost making it equal to hospitals, and the pathway will continue. They become surgeon owned. They'll be heavy in bariatrics, heavy in elective surgery or scheduled surgery, certainly not trauma or emergency surgery. And so I think those GLP-1 drugs will have an early impact on people, but not a long-term impact. And I think eventually it'll become a feeder system as it becomes less intimidating to get that bariatric surgery inside of a really well-run ASC business. And I think short term it may have somewhat of an impact, but I think it becomes a feeder system for the category, to use that as an example.
Yeah.
So I have a question regarding hiring for all these future jobs. From my experience now in this traditional hiring system, it even goes down to have you sold the same product, not even to the same target group, even the same product. But with all these new technologies, there is no one who has ever sold it. So when it comes to hiring, what are you looking for when you hire, let's say, the first salesperson or the first marketing person?
It's a really good question.
Mm.
So with this acceleration to technology, what's not changing is if you look historically, most of the startups, the good ones, will look at it this way. They'll say, okay, do you know the call point, therapeutic call point? So that you can certainly have experience in. What's the call point?
Right.
The second is, did you come out of an environment that's sold against budget or sold against clinical competition? That's an important item
Yeah.
to identify as well. And then finally, maybe not finally, but the third one would be, have you stood up a product that has not been to market yet and you had to bring it to market? You had to launch a small pilot. You selected micro regions of the country if you're in the US, or micro regions in Europe, and then have you driven power users, immediate adoption, ongoing utilization, and then designed your sales force, not just to sell the first one, leave it behind, and then go sell another, but are you designing your sales organization, and have you designed a sales organization to show that you can get immediate adoption, ongoing utilization, have built a team to drive utilization? Because if you use some of these devices and they're not so compelling, or they take a while because of workflow or current standard of care, that you don't design your sales team in order to drive ongoing utilization that eventually gets traction, I want to know that you did that. And then finally, the real power curve is, have you sold a product that doesn't have reimbursement but worked through market access and then eventually got reimbursement on that? That's, if you can get all four of those, then you've got yourself a player.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I have these discussions with Omar Khatib and Steve Bell. In your mind, the sales force is not dead,
No,
right?
Salesforce. The methodology of
Not in MedTech.
selling, but we are going to break away from order takers and innovators. So when I look at talent,
Yes.
unfortunately, a large part of the population, especially coming out of the strategics, are order takers.
Yeah.
And so I'm really worried about them because their sales forces are being reduced.
Mhm.
Digital engagement is helping in some of that top of the funnel. And I know Omar is a big believer in that, and I respect a lot of Omar's thoughts. And on the other side, I have some, counter discussions to some of his thoughts.
Yes.
But I think the differentiating bifurcation of order takers and clinical sales excellence are going to be important. Now, the clinical sales excellence who use digital strategies will beat everybody.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. What do you mean by those digital strategies? What are you thinking?
So when you think about digital strategies, there's data sets in the marketplace right now that you can go way upstream and find out referral patterns. You can find out procedure volumes. You can type of procedure, right? You can go back to the early days of the drug business with Purdue Pharma, who did it first. They found out who were the power users on those opioid drugs, and then they just continued. And J&J did it, by the way, with one of their drugs too, their opioid medication. What was the book that just came out by
No
J&J?
More Tears.
It'll come to mind, right? No More Tears. Yeah.
No More
So
Tears.
read that book. No More Tears.
I just got.
Yeah. So there's data in the marketplace that's digital. You have referral patterns that's digital. There is there's a certain number of procedures digital. Then you can start to outreach to these clinicians, and even more importantly, their care teams, and more importantly, their gatekeepers.
Yes.
And you can start marketing your data to them, whether it's clinical data, marketing data, competitive data. And you can start softening the targets with that. And then when you bring in the right person who understands the call point, knows how to execute on a clinical sale, and then has the proper follow-up and continues to be, you need a good product, of course. You can't get around the good product. That is the use of digital tools in order to sell. I'm not just talking about putting an advertisement on LinkedIn and hoping the docs see it.
No, absolutely. And as someone looking at their career, you should probably look at your product and say, hey, could somebody order this off the internet, right? Like ordering from a catalog, but order this off the internet without me having to visit the hospital and take that order? If the answer to that is yes, maybe you should be thinking of something else, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, all you need to do is go on LinkedIn and look at all the salespeople who are holding hospitals accountable for them not being able to get to the docs.
Yeah.
So reverse engineer that, and that's not a company that you want to go to for a sales organization, because that's on a pathway to the same way pharma went when you just dropped off detailing and information on a product, right?
Yeah.
This is why cardiac is so important, structural is so important, robotics is so important, endoluminal is so important, that if you are not adding clinical excellence to the procedure and the product, or you're not required to be in every procedure, and even to this day, large part of the structural heart, even if I'm not mistaken, MitraClip, always, Procept, always in the procedure. If you're not required to be in the procedure all the time, you are not adding value to the sales pipeline. You're likely going to find yourself to become irrelevant sooner than later.
Yeah.
So you mentioned several times clinical now, clinical selling and so on. If someone wants to start in MedTech, which background would you recommend today? Because when I started 24 years ago,
Don't age
they
yourself.
were,
Okay, don't age yourself.
yeah, I know.
10 years ago. When you started 10 years ago.
When I started 5 years ago, a long time ago, they were really looking for sellers, right? They said, like, even from insurances, they will be so much better than anyone with a medical background. Would you say now, after what you were saying with clinical selling, that nurses have a comeback in medical sales?
I think it's depending on what product or call point is. So as an example, we're building a fantastic company called Aquapass, right? It's a heart failure play coming out of Israel. Noam Josephy is the CEO, fantastic company. So, and Noam came out of Abiomed and Pella, and he's probably one of the premier thinkers in clinical on heart failure. So yeah, that's the kind of spot on, as we're running through clinical trials, we're looking for people who understand either the heart failure or structural heart space and have a level of confidence and can interact in driving the clinical trial and bedside advisement to the clinician, right? So that's where we start early stage. Having said that, some people in that clinical trial world, and they're nurses, to answer your question, some can be nurses, again, not any nurse, but out of heart failure, right, or cardiac space, where they understand what's going on in that procedure and with that patient. And so as you work through that clinical trial, there's two personalities that emerge if you're starting to get into MedTech. There's the clinical ops, sort of highly focused data person, and then there's the clinical person who indexes towards the procedure and the work with the clinician and the care team and a facilitator, and also somebody who wants to sell and hit a number. On the nurse's side are the two opportunities and the pathways to get into. And we're seeing younger nurses realizing that they're not going to get to give as much patient care as they thought when they went through nursing school and got their BSN here in the States. And they're looking for crossover opportunities, and they're highly valued people on the way into MedTech. And the way I would do that, though, is I would either go to a very, very well-vetted startup, or I would go to a large corporate who will put you through 2 years of training, clinical and sales training. And that's why I like the big strategics for the first 2 years if you're going to get into sales, because they teach you the methodical side of selling and the training side. And I think Boston Sci is one of the best in that areas too, if we're going to start tossing out names. So, that would be an entry point. And then if you're really looking to get in, the guidance I give to people all the time is go into clinical side of things, not clinical sales, but into clinical affairs. And even if you can't get into a big strategic, go to a CRO, clinical research organization. They usually have a lower bar. They're almost like a distributor if you think about selling medical devices, only they're doing that on clinical trials. And that is your on-ramp. If you're smart, if you have a nursing degree, or even if you don't have a nursing degree and you're coming out of a 4-year degree, they are looking for smart, behaved, well presentable, hard charging, well organized people. And then once you spend 2 years at a CRO, 3 years, and you get that clinical domain experience, then you could start leveraging that and moving into a medical device company at large proper.
Yeah, amazing. That's great advice, Joe. And Joe, when I spoke to Silke, I described you, and I hope you love this term, is as a vulnerable educationalist, right? You are not afraid to put it out there. And I give an example. Like I watched one of your posts once where you brought in the fact that martial arts is a big thing in your life and it's driven your philosophy and stuff. And that's where I felt you were being so honest and transparent to people and educating at the same time. So maybe let's talk about how your combat sport experience has influenced your career as well.
Yeah. So I've been engaged in combat sports since my late teens, 63 now. I've got black belts in Taekwondo, which is Take My Do for those who are at it, Aikido, Kempo. And the one I'm most proud of is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that I got about 12 years ago. And I had back 13 to like 16 or so, 12, some of the top fighters in the UFC in the 155 category. So I owned a very large mixed martial art gym. I also brought the world champion Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Marcos Buchecha Almeida, up from Brazil. He is, you look in the Guinness Book of World Records, or if you follow BJJ, Shesha is, they say, the best Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitor of all time.
Oh, wow.
So I brought Shesha up from Brazil. I had learned Brazilian Portuguese. Yeah. And I was committed. I tend to only do a few things, Cash, but when I do, I go hard.
You do them, you're all in.
You're just happy that it's...
You know, and you didn't say black belt, you said black belts.
Yeah. So,
exactly. That's why I'm so happy it's virtual.
So I was their managers, one of the key trainers with them, primarily strength conditioning and nutrition. We had really great coaches, boxing coaches. But the beautiful thing about combat sports and real combat sports, and I'll just leave it there. The realest combat sport is, there's three: boxing, wrestling, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and all the subsets of wrestling. Others tend to be a little bit more like tag and ballet. I'll just leave that there. Problem solving that has to occur on the mat or on the canvas if you're boxing. The real-time problem solving with immediate consequences and the decision-making tree that is so real-time you can't even understand it. A lot of time it just becomes hardwired after you've learned, is so indicative of business and life. And so when you have the speed of an opponent, and sometimes an opponent is a person in life, sometimes it's a relationship, sometimes it's a boss, sometimes it's a driver in another car. You get my point? But when that attack, and I'm not using that as a negative, when that attack comes on, your ability to cycle through, to use a good friend of mine, Tony Blauer, cycle through behavior, right? The fear loop that human beings go through. And if you look up cycle of behavior, Tony Blauer, and Tony, he's probably taught me the most important lessons in my life on the management of fear. If I could give any gift at all, it's go see Cycle of Behavior, Tony Blauer on YouTube. But cycling through that attack and that unforeseen sniper moment, and then you having to go through and problem solve only after you've managed the fear loop, because we've all been there. We've all knew what to do when something happened very fast, but we got frozen by the fear in place, and we're never able to access all of our toolkit in order to get to a solution. And that's what combat sports does for you, at least the three I mentioned: boxing, wrestling, and all versions of that, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah. Wow. That's incredible. I think we're at the point of asking our special question, Silke.
Yeah.
To be honest.
So our final question is always the same. What are the three things you know now that you wish you would have known then? And I would like to add, because I'm so impressed by your career, was there anything you would do differently today? And did you fail at some point? Because it looks like a huge success.
Let me answer the last one first. There's nothing I would change because I don't know how that would impact who I am today. I'm quite comfortable with who I am today, but I know I'm so much more than I am today. So, and I take that from somebody like Jordan Peterson. When you say you're fine just how you are, I'm like, no, you're not. You're so much more than you think you are. But stop, just do the work. I'll answer it that way, Silke. And what I wish I knew then that I know now, I wish I would have been more patient with people, and I'm still working on that. So patience with individuals. And it's so funny, I'm probably the least patient with the people closest to me who deserve the most patience. So that's one. The second would be, everybody has got a massive struggle going on, and you just need to understand they've got a massive struggle going on and give them some grace. Where I used to dismiss people who maybe didn't perform as well as I thought that they should have, not could have. And then those are the two most honest ones. The third one, I would have to think a little longer, and I don't want to take all your listeners' time up, but those two are, I guess the third one would be get more sleep. I used to be proud that I slept so little, and now I get 8 hours a day, and I still have time. I go to bed at 8, and I wake up at 4. So, but get more sleep. I wish I knew that. I wish I would have subscribed to that back then.
With everything you do, I'm surprised you get any sleep.
Yeah, 8 hours, pretty much that's almost mandatory.
Very important for stress and keeping a fit body, right?
Yeah.
So you're not in the 5 a.m. club, you're in the 4 a.m. club.
4 a.m. club.
That's impressive.
I'm not saying that the flex, that's just where my body works better since I can remember. So there's no flex there. And I never like to stay up late at night. Nothing good happens late at night. We know that. Well, some things that aren't good are good, but we'll leave that there. And then I'm just a morning person.
Wow. Joe, when I asked you to do this, you were generous to the score. You were absolutely, yeah, of course you do it. This has been, I think, a masterclass in, I'll use that term again, vulnerable educationalist that you are. The generosity, your authenticity, purpose-driven just shines through. I know you're an advocate for giving without expecting anything in return. So thank you for that. The way you use storytelling video to enhance our industry that we love, MedTech, because, everything we do, at the end of the day, there's a patient, right? And a family member of that patient that we are helping. And the impact that you make, you've just enhanced our industry so much by the thoughts and intuition that you brought in and the impact you have on the talent as well and the leaders in our business. So thank you for being the voice that you are. And all I can say is long may it continue. And we look forward to being in your shadow and doing our humble part as well. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Cash.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay, I really appreciate the opportunity to share it. And I really appreciate the invite on.
Thank you for tuning into our MedTech Lives. You have been listening to Zilka Rima and Cash Ikran. We're committed to bringing you insights and stories that inspire and inform the medical community. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network.